Man, is it noon yet?
Not yet.
God. Come on. Oh my God. Oh man. Man, this intermittent fasting sucks. Oh my God.
Jeremy, intermittent fasting doesn't need to suck necessarily. Well, welcome to today's dose of Dr. E and Dr. P, Preethika Ekanayake, who is an endocrinologist who I work closely with at UCSD. And Preethika has an interest in intermittent fasting. So, Preethika, just to wet people's whistle and to get them interested, what's the main difference between intermittent fasting and just reducing your calories?
Yeah, so both things lead to better metabolic parameters. But I would say the biggest difference between continuous calorie reduction and intermittent fasting is that it's really hard to sustain calorie reduction over a long period of time, as opposed to intermittent fasting, which is less of a diet and more of a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, caloric restriction. You say continuous caloric restriction. That's the problem. It's never continuous. So, and how many people have failed every diet they tried? And where you have to restrict the foods you like, you grew up with, your ethnic preferences. So, intermittent fasting, give us some of the benefits that they've seen with intermittent fasting.
Yeah, so even without reducing the number of calories you consume a day, by just condensing the time you eat to 7 to 8 hours or even 10 hours and fasting the rest of the day, you get better insulin sensitivity, weight loss properties, anti-inflammatory benefits when they did some of these trials, and improved cognition. And they've even done intermittent fasting studies on patients with asthma that shown better peak flows and better breathing.
Yeah, and you mentioned another study on our podcast that we did, men with metabolic syndrome, meaning they have all the stigmata of people with type 2 diabetes, obesity, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and they went on a 10-hour, see, I remember my cognition, 10-hour day fast, and many parameters improved around their health. So I just love the fact that you don't have to tell people what to eat.
No, I totally agree. And it just doesn't feel like a chore, unlike another regular sort of a diet. And people tend to be more successful if we can all eat and be satisfied without completely changing our lives and our lifestyle.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the most common types of intermittent fasting. There are different types, but talk about the time period that you need and the whole thing about ketone production. Starvation ketones, not diabetic ketoacidosis.
Right. So most of us fast 8 hours when we sleep. But intermittent fasting kind of shift that a little bit or expand that longer to 12 and 16 hours of fasting. So what happens during that time is our bodies end up depleting all the glucoses we use from our last meal and then start breaking down all the glycogen, which is a stored form of glucose.
You're getting complicated.
Yeah.
Break down your glycogen.
And then eventually, when we're fasting a little bit longer, we start breaking down our fat stores. And those fat oxidization or breaking down mechanism of fats end up leading to these superfuels called ketones that our brain can use, our muscle can use. So we can continue to have good cognition during intermittent fasting. Our lean muscle mass doesn't get lower as opposed to continuous calorie restriction.
That's big. We don't want to lose these.
I definitely didn't want to lose mine, as you can tell.
What are the most popular types of intermittent fasting that you and I have both experienced success on?
Yeah, so I think the most popular one is this one called time-restricted fasting. And there's another bucket under that that's called early time-restricted fasting. That's when you would eat 7 to 2 hours a day or even 10 hours a day and fast the rest of the time, maybe 10 or 16 hours. And the early time-restricted fasting is when you move all your eating to earlier parts of the day. So for an example, finishing eating around like 3 or 4 p.m. or even 5 p.m. earlier in the day, better for your sleep. There's another one called alternate day fasting. You'd eat normal, fast, eat normal, fast a whole day. alternating between normal eating. And then the third type is alternate day modified fasting, where you would eat normally one day, take in whatever calories you normally take in. The next day you would do something very stringent, like a 700 per day calorie amount.
Yeah, well, make sure you check out Preethika's article on our website, which goes into all this in detail if you're missing some of it. Now, you and I do the same thing. We get up in the morning, we have coffee, and we pretty much do not eat anything till noon, 1 or 2 o'clock, and we have dinner 6, 7 o'clock. So that's a pretty good fast. Now, I put milk in my coffee, so call it cheating, but you drink black coffee.
Yes.
Yeah, and that helps. Now, what about people with diabetes? What are the downsides, if there are any at all?
Besides being hangry, I think the main thing is...
Hangry. I love that word.
Besides that, I think one thing to be a little bit cautious about talking to the medical provider that patients with diabetes see about, do we need to adjust their insulin regimen? Because oftentimes your insulin sensitivity dramatically improve during the fast, where you might need to cut down the basal insulin for type 1, for an example, especially if you're not on one of these smart pumps.
Yeah, mine's smart. It just lowers my insulin automatically.
And then for type 2 patients who are on the class of medications called SGLT2 inhibitors, it's important to always talk to the provider, the medical providers about, is this a safe combination of fasting and the SGLT2 class 2 used together? Because both of them can induce a little bit of ketosis. But in general, we both have patients who do these fasts very well, even with those medications on board.
Yeah, so Preethika is referring to Farxiga, Jardiance, Invokana that are used in type 1s now for heart disease, for kidney disease. And I think you have to admit that it's pretty rare and it just takes a little bit of education. So when's the last time you ate?
Well, I ate around noon because that's when I broke my fast.
Okay, well, I just broke my fast 1 minute ago. Thanks, everyone.
Let's go.